Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we've got part 50 of our Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and compare them to their real life fossil counterparts. So, yeah, today we've made it to part 50, so that's a bit of a monumental occasion, halfway to 100. We'll probably get to Planet Zoo some points, like 113, like something like that soon enough, but I'm really happy you guys have all been enjoying this series so far, and I like really talking about some cool animals, especially more than the first game, because we have so much variety that we can come and have a look at all the different animals and things like that. So that's really cool. So, enough about that. We're going to be starting off with the new species that we've got today. We're going to be starting off with Hypsilophodon, done by Netraptor and Pokemon fan 2750, who's converted to a new species for us. So yeah, we're going to have a look at this wonderful animal, Hypsilophodon. Let's have a look at this wonderful goober here. So this is Hypsilophodon. So Hypsilophodon, which means high crested tooth, these guys are a Neo-Ornithischian, so a later Ornithischian dinosaur genus from the early Cretaceous, and was often conventionally considered an early member of the group Ornithopoda, but more researchers actually question that, which is quite interesting. So this first specimen of Hypsilophodon was recovered in 1849, so quite a while ago. And these workers dug up the soon-to-be called Mantell Bower Bank block out of the Wessex Formation. So it's a very famous formation, like around the Isle of Wight, that gave us baryonyx, and recently those two new Spinosaurs, Riparivenator and Sucops or something like that. Those two are really cool, interesting new Spinosaurs, and these were given to the larger half of this block had vertebrae, ribs, some pelvis, and was given to naturalist James Scott Bowerbank, and the remainder was given to Gideon Mantell. And after his death, the Mantell's portion was given to the British Museum, and this was often considered to be a young iguanodon at the time. Then it was unquestioned, and that was unquestioned until Thomas Henry Huxley, who was also known as Darwin's bulldog, as he was a fierce supporter of the theory of evolution. Like, it was originally kind of popularized by Darwin, and compared them to iguanodon, and then thought, oh, they must be different things. And then eventually they got their own name from iguanodon. They became Hypsilophodon, and Huxley first announced that. And the species was named Hypsilophodon foxy, and the holotype was the fox skull, which is kind of given its name. And yeah, all talking about that. And yeah, it was found to originally be part of Iguanodontidae, and got the name Hypsilophodon, which means high ridge tooth, which is quite similar to the Iguanodon teeth, but they're obviously clearly different animals. And a lot of people, when this was first announced, people were like, "Oh, is this really a new genus?" And some people actually compare these guys to be significant differences between Equus and Hyperion, which is said to be quite sufficient to make that distinction, which is quite interesting. But yeah, some later research coming into like the 1900s, or the like early 20th century, we've got some more specimens that have been found, and the most known Hypsilophodon specimens were discovered between 1849 and 1921, and they were all kind of collected together, with more modern research begun with like Peter Malcolm Galton, who kind of described a second species, Hypsilophodon willandi, and this was described from South Dakota, but then that eventually became like Camptosaurus. And then really the only one now was H. foxy, which was already described. They've been split into other species such as Orodromius and things like that. But it's now really only known from the early Cretaceous of the Isle of Wight and potentially Portugal and Spain, which is quite interesting, though they have been split into some other species as well. So in terms of its anatomy and things like that, these guys were quite relatively small dinosaurs, not like super small like Compsognathus or even like hummingbird size. These guys got a maximum length of about 2.3 meters, or about 7 feet long. And though original study by Gatton kind of described it as being like 2 meters long, but kind of a little bit over the top. Probably about a little over 2 meters is probably the best analysis. and also confirmed the femur was Vladosaurus, which was a split off from Hypsilophodon and downsized it to about 1.8 meters. So the largest specimen we have now is about 202 millimeters with a femur length, with a typical specimen like being like maximum 2 meters, and typical specimen is about 1.5 meters long. And like most smaller dinosaurs, these guys, as you can tell here, are bipedal, and they run on 2 legs, and they're able to run around. They have a lot of features such as a lightweight skeleton, aerodynamic pose, long legs, and stiff tail, which had ossified tendons in these tails that kept them stiff, which is quite interesting. And actually, despite living in kind of the later part of the Cretaceous, which is the early Cretaceous, which is the Weldon group, these guys have quite a few primitive traits, as we can see here. They've actually got these 5-fingered hands, which is quite interesting. And that's another really cool thing about these guys. And the fifth finger may have actually had a specialized function to be able to help grasp food items, which is quite interesting. So yeah, they have a lot of other traits that kind of give them a more quote-unquote primitive anatomy. And they didn't really specialize much. And this also led to these guys may have potentially been like omnivorous, so they didn't really change too much from their early ancestors' forms, which is quite interesting. So they may have just re-evolved a lot of these convergent traits, or they may have had these convergent traits to begin with because they're considered quite basal. So Huxley originally put Hypsilophodon in Iguanodontidae, and then they were put in their own group, Hypsilophodontidae. But most recent kind of analyses put Hypsilophodon as quite a basal ornithopod. More recently, in 2017, they removed Hypsilophodon itself and put an sister group to the Sauropoda in a more basal position, and several other Hypsilophodonts have got similar classifications. So this is kind of the group before the split between other ornithopods and then Margicephali, which includes Pachycephalosaurs and Ceratopsians. So they were around before the split, so they are quite early in the evolution of dinosaurs, which is also really cool. And due to their smaller size, these guys was most likely feeding on low-grown vegetation, and they have these quite strong jaws. Structure of its skull suggests that these guys may have been chewing, and they would have been simple chewing, almost like all other skins, been able to do that and kind of chew it up and things like that, which is quite interesting. And early paleontologists actually modeled the body of this herbivore into various ways. Originally thought they could climb trees. They even thought they had a boreal lifestyle, may have hopped around like a kangaroo with like a quadrupedal stance, much like a kangaroo. They thought they had toes that like a hallux, which allows them to grip onto branches and things like that, or also extra hands to kind of first metacarpal, things like that, a movable toe. But more accurately, they were just running around in this bipedal form like we consider them today. And though there hasn't been a level of parental care that's been defined, nests have not been found, although there's nearly a range of nests that are quite similar to these guys, so other species that are quite similar to Hypsilophodon, that suggests that some actually took care of their babies before hatching, and the Hypsilophodon fossils in these kind of formations actually suggest that they may have died in a single mass mortality event. And for these reasons, Hypsilophodonts, particularly Hypsilophodons, have been referred to as deer of the Mesozoic because they moved around potentially in quite large groups. And some indications actually suggest that these reproductive habits is provided by the possibility of sexual dimorphism. So Galton actually considered likely that the exemplars of 5 instead of 6 sacral vertebrae, which some species have the vertebrae not normally count the first sacrum touching the pelvis, may have actually been female individuals. So females, Hypsilophodons, may have had an extra sacral vertebrae. So that's quite interesting. So yeah, a cool mod. I really did love these guys. I love the little guys here, Hypsilophodon. I think it's a very important dinosaur in history, but not quite as famous as it should be. And of course, people love to have the arboreal memes and things like that. Very much a little cutie. Definitely a big fan of this guy. So we're going to let them walk off and do their own things. Let them run off. There we are. So next up, we haven't got a dinosaur this time. We've got everyone's favorite little pug crocodile. We've got Cymosuchus. Look at this little cutie, little friend. Let's give you a little pause. Let's have a look at you in the light. We might have a look at you. You're probably the nicest looking one. Look at this cutie. Oh my gosh, look how cute he is. What do you guys think? Let's see if we can zoom in and get a good look at this cutie. Look at that cutie. So this is Simasuchus, whose name in Greek means pug-nosed crocodile, which is referring to the blunt snout, and I think it's rather accurate. These guys are an extinct genus of Notosuchian crocodilomorph, which is from the late Cretaceous of Madagascar, and obviously got its name from quite its short skull. Simasuchus itself was quite of a small animal, about 2.5 feet long, or about 0.75 meters, based on the skeletons of mature individuals. And in contrast to most crocodiles, like we think of most crocodiles, they have their really long snouts with big teeth. These guys have very, very short snouts, where they got the name kind of pug nose. They look like a pug, so that's where they get the name the pug nose crocodile. And the shape of the skull is actually considers quite a bit, so there may be some sexual dimorphism or variation between specimens or ornamentation and body projections, which is quite interesting. And these guys would have most likely held their head kind of to an angle there. These guys were most likely eating like plants and things like that. These guys are most likely herbivores. And their teeth, that helps suggest this, their teeth are actually shaped a lot like maple leaves, which is quite interesting. And the back of the skull, the condyle, which is the bit where the neck vertebrae articulates it, is downturned. So these guys have quite a unique anatomy. They're like a crocodile trying to be a little rabbit, which is quite interesting. In most respects, the other terrestrial crocodilians is pretty much the same. There's a few differences though. They've got like a kind of a bigger scapula. They may have been digging a lot. Most of these spinal column is known. They have 8 cervical vertebrae in their neck and 15 dorsal vertebrae, and they have they have quite short tails. So unlike a lot of crocodiles which have quite big long tails that they use for swimming, these guys would have had very short tails compared to. And like other crocodiles, these guys were completely covered in osteoderms, and they form bony shields around the back and the underside. And unusually among crocodilian forms, these guys have osteoderms covering their limbs, as you can kind of see there, and the osteoderms also cover the belly are like plate-like, so that really gave them a lot of extra protection, probably because they're a lot smaller and things like that, gave them a lot of extra protection. So the history of the species, the full name, the first specimen of Simasuchus clarkii, these guys were found in 2000, which included complete skull and lower jaw and parts of the skeletons. And 5 more specimens were described. That pretty much shows we have the majority of the specimen now. There's been many isolated teeth found in the Mahajanga Basin, and most remains have been found as part of that project as well, and these come from the Maraneva Formation. And the Maraneva Formation, as we'll talk about, is home to a lot of quite famous animals, as we'll see on Prehistoric Planet, because this guy's in Season 2 of Prehistoric Planet, which I'm quite excited to see. Really, really awesome. So in terms of who this guy's related to, these guys are considered quite a basal member of the group Notosuchia, which is a really interesting group of crocodilians that kind of decided we're going to try and be mammals. And there's lots of interesting animal crocodilians within that. There's one relative of Notosuchus, Simasuchus, which has rabbit-like teeth, which is like super. I think his name's Nikari or something. It's really interesting. But that's a bit of kind of a side there. These guys were most likely or more closely related in their own group, kind of like a Zipolofa, and related to Libracasuchus and Malawisuchus, relatives of that. Quite interesting within Notosuchia, kind of their own smaller group. And in terms of the paleobiology, these guys would have, like other Notosuchians, been completely terrestrial. They wouldn't have been able to swim well with their tail. They wouldn't swim nearly as well as normal crocodilians, or we consider. The osteoderm shield is inflexible. That means these guys restricted that lateral movement, so they wouldn't be like jigging that much. They wouldn't have been doing too much of that. So these guys would have most likely, along with their robust legs, would have been living a lot on land, potentially digging as well. And the hind limbs of these guys is actually semi-erect, unlike the fully erect posture of other Notosuchians, which is quite interesting. It's interesting. So these guys were also herbivores. Their dentition is quite similar to that of iguanas, with that maple leaf-like shape. And their fossorial or burrowing lifestyle has been proposed, but not widely agreed upon, as these guys have quite short limbs and robust short limbs and short snout, would appear quite shovel-like. And a lot of these, including the strong neck muscles, may have suggested kind of a digging lifestyle, but that's not completely agreed on. But also we can see what its habitat, as we mentioned, it lived on Madagascar. There have been some other relatives of crocodiliforms, kind of Epiparasuchus, found in the same formation, but we don't know how it's related to Simasuchus. These guys have been considered a basal or Neosuchian in various analyses, and nearly all Notosuchians come from Gondwana, so that means these guys must have existed throughout kind of the Mesozoic when Gondwana was connected. It included South America, Africa, Madagascar, India, Australia, and Antarctica. So these guys, also the Leprechaucasus, which lived in Egypt, is quite a close relative. And the formation this guy would have lived with all sorts of really, really cool animals, such as Majungasaurus, Rapidosaurus, and a few other like cool animals, as we'll see in Prehistoric Planet, which is season 2, which I'm quite excited to see. Buzabufo, which was also a mod made by the same guy, it's called Argzil, I believe you say that, who did a wonderful job with this mod. I love seeing Samasukas. Just look at this little friend. Oh, let's have a look at our little friend here. Well, let's have a look. Oh, that's not Hypsilophodon. We want Samasukas. Look at these little guys. I'm so in love with these little guys. Look at this little friend. So yeah, this one is done by Angziel, I believe you say that. He did a really wonderful job giving this little guy some life. Really, really awesome. Nice to see Samasukas. Definitely a very cool animal I love. So yeah, that's one mod done. Next up, we have got by Master Doot, we've got Parallel Therizinosaurus, which is quite a long name. This was done by Master Doot, so let's have a wonderful look at this guy. So as you can see, this is Parallel Therizinosaurus, I believe you say that. Quite a long name. Let's have a look at you guys. Let's have a look at you since you're standing in the light for us. Maybe. Yeah. I'll have a look at you. So this is Parallel Therizinosaurus, if you say that. Quite a long name. So this guy is the extinct genus of Therizinosaurus. These guys come from the late Cretaceous Onashuni Formation from Hokigawa, Japan, and they come from. This is a single species known, Japanensis, I believe say that, known from a partial right hand and essential vertebrae. So it's not well known, and is also the youngest therizinosaur actually known from Japan. So it tells us a little about their anatomy. So the holotype of this guy was discovered in September 2000 in Hokigawa, Japan, and these guys date back to the early Campanian of the late Cretaceous. So probably about like 70, 80 million years ago or so. And the specimen contains cervical vertebrae and metacarpal, so lots of bits of the hand. And it wasn't actually described until 2022, where it was described as Parallelopsinosaurus, and it was a new genus and species found in Japan. And the taxon represents the first named therizinosaur within Japan, and the two other unnamed specimens being known. The generic name, which is Parallelopterizinosaurus, which means paralos, which means tidal scythe lizard. So that's what it means. And then Japanois, or we say that is the taxon discovery in Japan. So basically, it's saying the tidal scythe lizard from Japan. That's its full name. And because it's so fragmentary, we only have one vertebrae and a hand from it. We don't know too much about it, but we know from phylogenetic analyses these guys would have been a member of a clade with a lot of very other kind of therizinosaurs. That includes Therizinosaurus itself, Sunzosaurus, and an unnamed therizinosaur from Uzbekistan, which would have been kind of all related in there. Very, very interesting animal, though. You can see it's quite a bit smaller. These guys probably would have been only 2 or 3, or like 4 or 5 meters long, if that. Not too big, but really, really cool. I love to see how this guy's kind of molded on the Pyroraptor and kind of given more interesting look. Definitely very, very interesting to see this guy. But yeah, really, really awesome. Actually, a dinosaur that was only recently described, as I mentioned, 2022. So nice to see some recent discoveries in Jurassic World Evolution 2. And Master Dude, as always, has done a rather wonderful job of bringing these guys to life. So really, really awesome. So we're going to let them run off and do their thing. Let's them run off and do their own thing. So next up, we are moving over to some carnivores. So this is another paleo edit. This is a kind of one that's already been done, but it's been edited a bit to give it a little bit better anatomy. This is also a new cosmetic as well. This was done by Swift Wyvern, and this is Dimetrodon. So we can see we've finally got ourselves a really nice and awesome Dimetrodon. So let's have a look at these guys. Oh, we'll have a look at you. You look like the nicest one. So we can see there's definitely quite a few changes going on here. We're going to start off with the head. We can see their head looks much more accurate to what we actually know of Dimetrodon and not just the T-Rex head like the original game one. And Dimetrodon, as I always keep mentioning whenever I do a model, like remaster these guys and talk about them, these guys are, Dimetrodon means two types of teeth, as they have canines and incisors as well, so they've got two different kinds of teeth, which is kind of hard to see with those lips on, but I've already showed them off enough times that I think you guys can uh, not need to worry about that. But we can see some changes to the neck here. We can see there's kind of a little divot to their like spine there, so it goes kind of short along the neck, and then it goes quite high along here, and quite rounded as well. So it really looks interesting there. You can see the different shapes there. You also see the textures change. It doesn't have quite these really weird osteoderms. From what we know of other synapsids, early synapsids, these guys most likely would have had quite flat skin and then maybe like some belly scales. So quite small, round scales, like almost like a smooth skin. Nothing too like no big osteoderms, things like that for Dimetrodon. But it's very possible that these guys could have had hair because we have potential poop from the Permian that's preserved with hair. So it's possible that this guy could have had feathers, and there's been reconstructions with feathers. Not feathers, fur. Feathers is something that's based with Ornithodira, so it's pterosaurs and dinosaurs potentially, or just dinosaurs. I've already explained it in a couple other videos, but these guys most likely could have had fur, and I think that's quite interesting. But I'm glad that they went conservative here because that's very speculative still. And then we can see these guys. The gives them a little bit more accurate posture because the original one was way too fat, but we can see now they've got this kind of high walk going. So these guys didn't kind of drag their bellies around like of other species. These guys would have been able to high walk, very similar to crocodilians. So these guys would have been almost like a commie, like constantly push up, walking around, things like that. So really, really cool that that's been represented here. So he's got a bit of a tummy tuck as well. So he isn't quite so chunky. And you can see that tail's been quite a bit shortened because the original tail from Jurassic World Evolution is quite a bit longer than it needs to be, but we can see these guys have quite a bit of a shorter tail, and I think still looks quite nice. Though it could probably be a bit more erect, but they look kind of like this dragging tail, I guess, in the original game. But you can see some texture changes, all that, and also got this wonderful new pattern. So really nice to see a accurate, or at least semi-accurate, Dimetrodon. And be very interesting to give it feathers, as we see even in the franchise they gave Dilostrosaurus, not feathers. I keep saying feathers. It's fur. These guys could have fur, which is very possible, and it'd be cool if they gave it to Lystrosaurus in the franchise, so why not give it to these guys? But yeah, really, really awesome. I would like to see a third Dimetrodon. I think that'd be quite interesting, but yeah, really cool mod regardless. So we're going to let them run off and do their thing. So run off, go out while you still can. So we've got another couple mods from Master Dude. We have got a Rapator, which is quite confusing, or Raptor. Very interesting animal. Well, not very interesting because it's really only known from one bone, but we'll get into that. So let's have a look at this guy. So this, as I mentioned, is Raptor. So this guy is a genus of theropod from New South Wales in Australia, from Gibbon Creek, and dates to the Albanian to Cenomanian, so about 105 to 96 million years ago in the Cretaceous period. And the full type species name is Rapator ornitholus which they say that, and was originally described by Fernrich Dunn Hunain in 1932. So the holotype and the only known specimen of this guy consists of a single left hand bone, which was discovered in 1905 near Lightning Ridge. And the fossil has actually also been opalized because that area there's a lot of fossils that have been opalized. The meaning of the generic name is actually quite problematic, with von Huhn giving no etymology. Rapator does not exist in classical Latin. and it's often really used in medieval Latin with means violator. But another one may have been influenced by rapateer, which means to plunder, and mistakenly kind of wrapped it like that because it's often spelled raptor, which means Caesar, and you get velociraptor, Utah raptor, things like that. But its specific name or its species name means resembling Ornitholestes because it kind of was considered to be quite similar to that at the time. And remains of a Megaraptor nicknamed Lightning Claw were discovered in the same open fields southwest of Lightning Ridge, and may actually be more remains of Rapator, which is quite interesting. But the bone itself is only about 7 centimeters long, and shares many features with Ornitholestes, which actually applies to this specific name. Um, though several Silurian groups actually lack the second condyle, which is kind of one of those features. And if this guy was quite similar to Australovenator as we get into in kind of build, these guys may have been about up to 9 meters in length or so, or about 30 feet, which is quite a bit decent size. The type specimen is obviously from that metacarpal, and was actually first to be described as an Alvirasaur, or a primitive Silurosaur, like Nimwecasaurus. But with the discovery of Australovenator quite a few years later, these guys are thought to be most likely a Megaraptoran, very similar to Australovenator and Maip and Megaraptor, things like that. And often was actually considered considered a dubious genus. So Raptor is a dubious genus, and quite because it's quite fragmentary. But they have found the difference between hand bones and Australovenator, suggesting these guys would have actually been quite distinct. And the two genera are separated by about 10 million years between each other, so they're very unlikely to them to be synonymous. But they've also been maybe synonymized with Gurtasuchus, which is a theropod from the same formation, and that one's only known from caudal vertebrae, so that may can't be proven because we can't really compare these to each other. But still, really cool. Very interesting dinosaur. Like a lot of dinosaurs are quite fragmentary, and this shows how a lot of fragmentary they can really be. So really cool to get the opportunity to talk about this dinosaur. Really cool. Love the skin on this guy. I like this one. Really pretty. So quite an awesome animal to talk about. So let's move on. So next up, we have got a cosmetic of a mod also done. We've got an accurate or more accurate Megaraptor done by Masadut. So you need the original Megaraptor mod, which was based on the Scorpius Rex for this, but this one's kind of an add-on that gives you a more scientifically accurate cosmetic variant to it. I know it's a little bit confusing, but I'm sure you guys got it now. But let's have a wonderful look at this guy. There we are. This is our Megaraptor. Much more scientifically accurate Megaraptor. And it looks quite pretty, if I do say so myself. Really big fan of this guy. See if you can get him to actually, like... There we are. I love this new feature, being able to pause and stuff like that. It's really awesome. But anyway, let's have a look at this wonderful guy here. So this is Megaraptor, which name means large thief. These guys are a genus of large theropod that come from the late Cretaceous. They've been discovered in the Pozzolana Formation in Argentina. And when they were first discovered, they were thought originally to be like a giant dromaeosaur, so like a giant velociraptor or utahraptor or deinonychus, but actually was also then classified as a neovenator allosaurid. But most recently, it's been considered a Megaraptoran, and the Megaraptorans are kind of all over the place. Some consider them to be a basal Silurosaur or a basal Tyrannosaurid even, so we really don't know too. It's kind of all over the place, but most kind of suggest them as Tyrannosaurids or early Silurosaurs at least. So these guys were originally described from a large sickle claw, which was thought to look like a sickle claw on the toes of a Utahraptor or Velociraptor, as I mentioned. But then a discovery of complete forelimb shows that, oh, that's not actually on the foot, it's actually on the hand. And this is actually the first finger on the hand. And due to its large size, people have been estimating that it's got to about 8 meters long, or about and weighed a ton. And the hands were actually unusually elongated, and he's bearing these large sickle claws that was even more recurved than animals such as Spinosaurus, which is quite interesting, or Spinosaurids. So these guys, the hand is quite distinct from basal Tentinurans, but it's really don't know whether it's a Spinosaurid, a Cheirdontosaurid, or something else entirely. but these guys often were considered neovenators or a neovenatidae. But more recent studies kind of suggest these guys were quite basal tyrannosaurids or coelurosaurs, and that kind of gives us a good comparison. The most recent taxonomy, because of the discovery of Maip, which is quite a large and later Cretaceous, like Maastrichtian aged Megaraptor, we find that these guys may have actually been in their own clade. So clade A would have been kind of this group of very much others like outside of South America group of Megaraptors, even though Megaraptor itself is from South America. So kind of this older group, which includes Australovenator, Anaeraptor, things like that, and then Clade B, which would have been later, that includes Maip and Isteodon, things like that, which are kind of the latest and greatest. They lived right up to the end of the Cretaceous, where the meteor hit, things like that. But in terms of the paleoecology, these guys would have lived in the late Tenorian and early Silurian Polyzebo formation, so probably about like 80 to 90, maybe a little bit later than that, or earlier than that, I mean. So these guys would have lived with titanosaurian sauropods such as Fucolongosaurus, Balasosaurus. Also would have lived with Unenlagia, which is quite an interesting dromaeosaur, Pampararaptor, Patagonicus, which is an alverosaurid, you know, the ones with the big claws like Mononicus. Another unnamed Megaraptorid and a bellysaurid called Alligasum, Novosaurids, ornithopods, and all sorts of different fish and birds and pterosaurs and things like Argentina Draco. So a very interesting animal from a very interesting place in time. So really, really cool. Nice to see. I know I've covered them a few times, but it's nice to get one that's finally like really scientifically accurate. So it's really cool to get a good look at this guy. So really, really awesome. Master has done a wonderful job with both of them. So I'm very, very happy. So next up, we are going to have a look at the animals of the lagoon persuasion, you could say. We're going to have a look at the ones in the lagoon. So next up, this is done by Annoying. I know he hasn't done, or they haven't done a modern in a while, so I'm quite excited to have a look at this one. But we have got here Dacosaurus, so let's have a wonderful look at these guys. Let's wait until let's get you in some, there we are. So this, as I mentioned, is Dacosaurus. So Dacosaurus, these guys are an extinct genus of crocodilomorph. They're within the family Mecheorhynchidae, and they lived during the late Cretaceous and up until the early Cretaceous. So the type species, Dacosaurus maximus, which means greater bite lizard. These are fossils known from Western Europe, so they can be found in England, France, Switzerland, and Germany. They come from the late Jurassic, which is the late Cambrian and Tithonian. But they've been isolated Dacosaurus teeth that were found in Germany that were actually mislabeled from being from Megalosaurus. And there's also Geosaurus, was originally named, Maximus was originally named as a species of Geosaurus, but then was split into Dacosaurus, which is quite interesting. And there's been other kind of fossils from these guys referable to Dacosaurus have been found in England, France, Switzerland, Poland, Germany, Russia, Argentina, and Mexico. So quite a wide range, and potentially a couple different species, but some have been lumped into them. So there's typically only two or so species. There's Maximus and Andilaensis, I believe you say that. And there's a couple other species like found in Argentina. And a lot of these guys, their teeth was often mislabeled for megalosaurid dinosaurs, so it shows they're quite similar, but which is quite interesting. But they typically have those two species known, and there has been incomplete skulls of Dacosaurus found from Mexico, which has not been referable to a specific species or even its own species. We don't know. It's still quite interesting. So these guys were all quite large, not like super duper large, but decently big. So Dacosaurus maximus probably got to about 4 to 5 meters long, or about 13 to 16 feet, so about the same length as a modern male saltwater crocodile, so still quite big. And they weighed between 200 275 kilograms. I'm not sure how true that is, because like a saltwater crocodile can get like half a ton, or nearly even a ton. Maybe not quite so small, but definitely big animals. So like I would say I could say pretty big. and their body was streamlined for greater efficiency. As you can see, they've got a very streamlined body. The Metriorhynchids are a group of marine crocodiles that evolved to live in the ocean, and they're even more well adapted for swimming. As you can see, they've got this fin there, very similar to like ichthyosaurs and sharks and mosasaurs, and they've got none of these osteoderms that make them so big and bulky. They're very much more streamlined, so they would have been quite good swimmers compared to modern crocodilians, which is quite interesting. Badachosaurus, as I mentioned, they're in their group of mesosuchines or metriorhynchids, so there would have been other ones that are like longer snouts to better adapt eating fish. These guys were most likely, with their larger skulls, feeding on larger things, as we'll get into. So what's cool as well, the incomplete skulls from Mexico actually show that these guys had quite well developed salt glands, like other metriorhynchids. And these guys probably would have used that because these guys obviously living in salty water. They need to get rid of all that excess salt, so that would have been a very important gland for them. And in terms of their diet, they're the only marine crocodilian or crocodiliform that evolved teeth that are both lateroventrally compressed and serrated. So they're very similar to like dinosaur teeth, and they've even actually been quite compared to killer whale teeth. So that's just these guys were very much like apex predators. And these guys also had larger jaw closing muscles or abductor muscles, and this suggests they had quite a powerful bite. And the skulls, as you can see, is quite triangular in shape with these large serrated teeth. They're very well adapted for eating larger prey and tearing off chunks of flesh. So these guys most likely would have preyed on like fish, but just even larger marine reptiles, things like that. So a very interesting ecology. And the species Maximus is actually one of the several species of metriorhynchids from the Molstein Formation of Germany, and this suggests these would have been a lot of niche partitioning within these crocodiliform kind of different species. So these species would have been pretty much big and biting into prey. So these guys would have been macro predators, so eating big animals. The other species would have been mostly fish eaters, so they would have had longer snouts, very much like gar eagles or dolphins, and feeding on smaller fish. More well adapted in that regard. But in the Maximus and kind of other species, Dachosaurus are most likely much more adapted because they had bigger heads, much more adapted for feeding on larger prey, which is quite cool. And I'd love to see an animal that we didn't get to talk about often. We don't often get to talk about marine crocodiles, but really, really awesome. Look at this guy's face. Look at this goober. Really, really big fan of this guy. So we're going to let them swim off, do their thing. Again, done by Annoying. Really, really good job to do that. And if you guys want to find Annoying's kind of name, they're actually with a 0 and not an O as the first Annoying. But yeah, really, really cool. So next up, we're going to have a look at the same time. So this guy's from the Jurassic as well, but obviously it's a giant fish, potentially the largest fish, one of the largest fish known to exist, which is quite interesting. We have got Leadsichthys. So we've got quite an interesting guy here. Let's see if we can get him in a good light. Nah, I want to get him in a good light. Let's see if we can... Really, really interesting animals. I do love these guys. Let's see if we can get him in a... So I want to get him in a good pose to show you guys. You know how I like to make sure these guys are in good poses. Come on, dive for me. Are you going to dive for me? Come on, please. Do it for me. There we are. So here's a perfect look at this guy. So this is Leadsichthys. Really, really awesome animal. So Leadsichthys is a pachycormid fish. These guys lived in the middle to late Jurassic, and is one of the largest. It's the largest ray-finned fish known, and potentially among the largest fish known. So this guys were first discovered in the 1880s, where the gentleman father Alfred Nicholson Leeds collected large fish near England, fish fossils near England, and he actually originally looked at these and kind of thought these the bones of these guys were actually the backplate of a Stegosaurian Omosaurus. But then in 22nd of August 1888, Othniel Charles Marsh, as you know him from the Bone Wars, came and visited and then showed that these actually were the bones of a giant fish. And then they got this formal description within 2 weeks. Arthur Smith Woodward came and described the species as Leadsictus problematicus, which means the leads fish. And the specific name problematicus referred to these guys were quite fragmentary and we kind of had no idea what they look like. And then it was also described and things like that. The holotype was found in the Oxford clay and it dates to about 165 million years of age. And they come from disarticulated elements of the skeleton, mostly fin ray elements from a single individual. But there have been other individuals known, like from gill rakers and things like that. So we do have quite a few fossils and kind of a general idea of how it looks. Originally, they are kind of just considered two species, but now it's only considered Leadsictus problematicus. But we know these guys kind of ranged from England to northern Germany and even lived in Chile and France as well. And they seem to have lived for about 5 million years. And there's a complete an isolated gill raker from Argentina that has been assigned to the early Tithonorians, so about 150 so million years ago. And the remains of about 70 individuals have been found so far, with most of them being quite fragmentary. And the specimen is already really like partially imperfectly known. And it's largely because that many of the elements like did not ossify, but they remained cartilage, which is kind of a bit of an issue. But this does actually help us with size a little bit because we know these guys were quite large. These are the largest known member of the bony fish, with the largest one today being the ocean sunfish. These guys were ordered of magnitude larger than these guys. Though the giant oarfish may rival their length, they would have been so much thinner than Leadsictus. So I believe some of the specimens known, the type species was estimated to be 9 meters long, but the largest individuals have been estimated. The largest estimates have been about from as 13 meters or about 44 feet up to about 27 meters or about 91 feet, and considered basically some of the most outrageous kind of estimates have put them as big as blue whales, up to like 35 meters or so. So quite a big, about the size of blue whales. But most recent estimates kind of suggest about 16 meters or so. So about the same size as Megalodon, or like a smaller, like about the same size as a humpback whale. So it's probably the best comparison. Most recent estimates consider about like 7 to 12 and 16 meters. So we actually have growth rings, so we know how much they grew or how fast they grew. Suggests these guys would have taken about 21 to 25 years to get to their adult size. And isolated individuals suggest that these guys may have got to about 16 meters, but that's not unreasonable. And we kind of contract that size now because we've looked at that, so which is quite interesting. And in terms of their phynology, they're in a group called Pachycormidae, and we don't know where their position is within the ray fin fishes. They seem to be very basal to teleosti, and these guys would have been the largest known teleost, which is a bony fish, which is quite interesting. And in terms of their paleobiology, these guys would have had a paleobiology or similar ecology to whale sharks and basking sharks today, where these guys would have been suspension feeders and using those specialized big gill rakers. They would have opened their mouths and filter out small fish and zooplankton and other small animals through their mouths. So the water would get filtered out, and then the gill rakers would have taken in any small animals and kind of swallowed them. And these guys also could have been ram feeders as they making their way past the water, or also actively like pumped water through their gills to try and get more food. Either or could work. And there's actually suggested that the furrow activities in Switzerland that have been attributed to plesiosaurs may have been Leadsictus kind of spouting water throughout its mouth to disturb like the animals within the sand and sediments, things like that, and kind of filter them out, and then kind of the sediment kind of filter out through their gills and kind of settle on the ground, which is quite interesting. And many are not actually very certain about the lifestyle or life cycle of Leadsictus. And some species or some studies have suggested these guys had linear growth. Some suggest that they've had quite a high metabolism. And also problematic is how these guys can increase in size quickly after first year of birth. As in teleosts, these guys are typically quite have small eggs, but obviously being quite a distant, but quite based on animal, there would have been something quite different going on with these guys. There's also been presence of bones like Metriorhynchids, which is marine crocodiles that we talked about before, that have potentially been actively hunting these guys. And these guys would have been about 3 meters long, quite a bit smaller than the larger Leadsictus, but they may have like preyed on them and may have actually scavenged on them as well. And these guys may have been preyed upon by pliosaurids, like larger pliosaurs, potentially even Liopleurodon, things like that. But which is quite interesting. Actually, they suggest that the climate change at the end of the Calavera may have actually led to their extinction, though there actually been a lot of remains of after that time, and there actually seems to be relatives or like ants or descendants from relatives of Lysictus may have lived into the late Cretaceous, such as Borodonectes and Rhinoconectes, which is quite interesting, and may have shown that these guys may have evolved multiple times to kind of have that kind of suspension feeding lifestyle similar to baleen whales and whale sharks and basking sharks, which is quite interesting. So it shows that animals that are completely distantly related kind of converge on that same lifestyle. These guys would have been really large suspension feeders like whale sharks and basking sharks. And recent studies have actually shown that these guys may have grown quite fast and may have actually, as I mentioned, and these guys may have swum or like cruised around at about 11 miles per hour, about 15 kilometers per hour, and while maintaining the oxidation of its body tissues as well, which is quite interesting. So, quite a big fish, as I mentioned, 16 meters long. This is basically a big tuna the size of a humpback whale, so that's really, really cool. I just love Lysictus. And I've covered it before, but that was very much like the Walking with Dinosaurs version, which is quite inaccurate. This is much more accurate to what we know of Lysictus and its relatives. So yeah, really, really huge animal, as I mentioned, like 16, potentially up to 16 meters long, and got to that size of about 25 years. So potentially quite a long-lived animal as well. So that's really, really cool. And may have weighed up to about like 50 tons. So that's about the same size as humpback whale. So yeah, that's so awesome. It's so much about Lysictus. It's just so cool. Really, really awesome. So next up, we got another one. But I need to say, Lysictus was done by Trippy 28 and Lord Spyzen 69. Nice. That's who made the Lysictus. They did a wonderful job. But next up, we're going to have a look at a mammal. We got a marine mammal coming up again. We got an ancient whale. We've got one that you probably recognize. We've got Basilosaurus. Let's see you swim out of here. I just want to get you in a good posture so I can talk about you. Yeah. Wait, no. No, yeah, no. There we are. So this is our wonderful big guy here. Oh no, we'll get you in a slightly better position. I think this one's better. There we are. So this is our wonderful Basilosaurus. As you can see, quite a long animal. This is actually on a rig of Kronosaurus, so very interesting to see how this guy's worked out. So this is Basilosaurus, which means king lizard, which is very interesting for a whale, but we get into that. These guys are a large predatory archosaur whale, which were a group of early whales. These guys lived from about 41 to about 33 million years ago, so around the Eocene, Oligocene. And these guys are the first ancient or prehistoric whale known to science. And there are two species known. There's Basilosaurus JWE from the United States, and they were originally thought to be giant reptiles, like giant sea serpents, so that's where they got the name Saurus lizard, but then it was later found to be an early mammal, and there's been other people trying to name them other things like Zoleurodon, things like that, to better fit a mammal, but because Basilosaurus was named first, that takes precedence, so it's always going to be Basilosaurus. And then in 1904, there was another species, Basilosaurus isis, that was found in Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, and Pakistan. There's also been fossils of Basilosaurus found in Peru, southwestern United States, New Zealand, places like that. So, yeah, potentially quite a worldwide species. So, yeah, as I mentioned, that's kind of what we got from there. In terms of it used to be a waste bucket taxon. They used to have different species. Now there's a few species split on them. But as I mentioned, the two species now are Pseudocus and Isis. But these guys were actually one of the largest animals known to extinct between the KPG extinction and between about 50 million years ago, where modern whales kind of reached those larger sizes. So the largest species of B. pseudicus got about 17 to 20 meters, or about 56 to 66 feet, and weighed about like was it 5.8? About 5 to 6 tons, though potentially probably a bit bigger. While B Isis was about 15 to 18 meters, or about 45 to 59 feet, and weighed about 6 tons, 6.5 tons, which is quite interesting. And what makes these guys quite distinct from other Basilisauran genuses, these guys have quite a bit larger body size. They have a more elongated vertebrae, so that you can see they've got very, very long body, as we'll get into. It's very important for their ecology. And they're also considered to be one of the largest, or the largest, of the Archaeocete whales, so very early relative of those big ancient whales, which is quite cool, or is the largest of the big ancient whales. So you can tell there's lots of features that give it away as a whale. It's got that streamlined body, it's got a fluke, it's got kind of a very much whale-like body, but it's very different. But we can see the Archaeocetes were very, very interesting, as most whales today, if they have teeth, they have like one type of teeth. But the dental formula for these guys would have had molars. They kind of have these incisors and these larger molars going down the back here. So, and these guys also did not have a melon, so their nostrils would have been quite like halfway up the snout, and they wouldn't have had a melon, so these guys would not have been able to echolocate. And they also weren't believed to be quite as social as modern whales, so we don't really have any evidence to proving or disproving that. Also shows that these guys have asymmetrical skulls like modern toothed whales, and it's quite similar between baleen whales and artiodactyls, which are closely related to cetaceans. And these guys would have been able to be able to detect high frequency sound and echolocation, which neither are thought to be present in Basilosaurus, though that possibly evolved to help them detect sounds in the water, so they would have been good at hearing, just not echolocating. And also as well, these guys would have had inner ears and sinuses that were partially present. These guys would have been able to hear in the water, so it's a really important adaptation for them. And they also would have had air-filled sinuses in the ears and snout as well, which is quite interesting, and was quite similar to modern cetaceans in that regard. So they're kind of like a midway between those early relative whales like Pachycetus and Ambulocetus, and they're kind of the midway between that and then our modern whales, which is quite interesting. So our largest big whales, they still have these kind of tiny little back limbs, as you kind of see here, these little hind limbs. These guys, even though they're like 16 meters long or about 50 feet long, they have a 35 centimeter, a little bit over a foot long hind limbs that are with fused tarsals and things like that. And the size of the limb and the absence of articulation suggests that these guys would have been using them much for locomotion. And analysis showed that these reduced forelimbs could rapidly duck between two positions. So that actually suggests that these guys may have actually used them to clasp each other while mating. And it's very similar to like modern snakes or like pelvic spurs, which is quite interesting. And that could work because they have quite long snake-like bodies, and that could have helped them. So it's very possible it could have also been covered in skin and like modern whales, and they just didn't use it. But what really sets these guys apart from modern whales is that they've been a complete skeleton found in 2015, and they have a total of 58 vertebrae, which is quite interesting, and like even up to 70 vertebrae in some regards. And these guys have quite an eel-like or angular form, that's the term, body shape, and their body would have been elongated across the centra throughout the thoracic cavity into the tail. And in life, these vertebrae would have been full with marrow, and because they're in large size, this would have made them buoyant. So these guys may have actually probably swam predominantly in 2 dimensions at the sea surface, in contrast to Smolodorhodon, which likely dived and was much more of a diver. And the skeletal anatomy suggests that these guys would have had quite a small fluke that was present and only really aided in vertical motion. So the similar size thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and caudal vertebrae actually do help imply that these guys would have swum in guelliform fashion. So very much like an eel. You know how eels like really like swim kind of with most of their tail, and it's like almost like a S shape going down. They would have swum very much like that, but only in vertical fashion. So they almost would have looked like a ribbon kind of flowing through the water, which is quite interesting. And there's not other whales that do that before or since. So that really suggests they may have had their own distinct ecology, which is quite interesting. and they may have moved in a very odd anguilliform fashion, which is completely unlike any modern cetacean. And the vertebrae also appear to be hollow and quite likely filled with fluid. So these guys more likely may have spent a lot more time around the surface and wouldn't have been quite as good divers as modern cetaceans, or even other cetaceans such as like Dorodon. And judging from the weak axial musculature on the and the thick limbs and bones of the limbs, these guys may have not been quite good at sustained swimming or deep diving or terrestrial locomotion. Though they did have an elbow joint in their front flippers like a seal, so probably they lived in quite shallow water or around the shallower parts of the ocean, or maybe even just hanged out in kind of the top part of the ocean, not diving very deep, and probably would use that to hunt animals. So clearly they're alright in that regard. But what also makes these guys really weird is that the cheek teeth, these guys have quite interesting morphology. So these guys would have had molars that allowed them to bite and chew food potentially. And scientists have been able to estimate the bite force of these guys, and they suggest that these guys may have had a bite force at least 16,000 newtons, or potentially even like 20,000 newtons, which is quite interesting. So, yeah, and people looking at the stomach contents, there's actually maybe some niche partitioning between the two different species, because they may have lived together potentially, because the ocean is quite a big place. B. cetacus may have been feeding a lot on fish or larger sharks, with also bite marks from juvenile Dorodons match the dentition of Basilosaurus isis. So it suggests that a kind of cetacus may have been feeding on larger fish and sharks, while isis may have been feeding on smaller whales, but which is true. But knowing most whales today, they don't really specialize at that, unlike like particular populations of different killer whales. So it could be possible that they did that, but they're more likely on that seafood diet. They seafood, they eat it. That would pretty much be anything from Dorodon to sea turtles, other marine mammals like sea snakes. They were quite large sea snakes that lived with Basilosaurus, things like that. Other smaller whales, large fish, things like that. And they were most likely active predators. And there's actually been the discovery of a juvenile Dorodon with bite marks indicate that these guys may have actually aimed for the skulls to kill their prey and torn their meals apart, which is based on some disarticulated remains of Dorodon. And this further cements that these guys would have been apex predators hunting down newborn or juveniles, and maybe following mothers and waiting for them to give birth. And the stomach contents have quite an elderly male, B. isis. They've actually not included Dorodon, but the fish Pycodus, which is quite interesting. So these guys would have lived in quite interesting habitats. They're believed to be the top predator of the ecosystems, and they would have lived in warm tropical environments across the Eocene and areas abundant in seagrasses. Like they would have like thalassodendron, which is also known as turtle grass. That also would have existed with Dorodon, other whales like Synthecetus and Bacillus pteris. Also primitive sirenians like proto-siren, early elephant relatives such as Molitherium, sea turtles, and many different types of sharks and fish and things like that. So quite abundant prey for these guys. And in terms of their extinction, these guys would have probably went extinct about 35 to 33 million years ago. And this extinction coincides with the Eocene-Oligocene extinction event, which happened about 33 million years ago, which resulted in the extinction of almost other archaeocetes, so ancient whales. And this is believed to be due to potentially volcanic activity, maybe a meteor impact, or just sudden climate change where the environment got cooler quite quick. And these may have caused quick disruptions in the circulation of the ocean, and that's what caused Basilosaurus to go extinct and didn't leave any descendants. And despite this new current of deep ocean unwelling, this is where the more modern versions of whales, like this is where the baleen and tooth whales that we know today kind of started evolving. So it took the archaeocetes potentially to go extinct, and that's where our modern whales came from that and evolved and became all the cool whales and dolphins that we have today. And as I mentioned, these guys are probably in their own group, Basilosaurine, and it also includes another group, Dorodontine, I believe you say that, and they have been declared invalid in the past, with Dorodon remains once considered juvenile Basilosaurus, but their own group of archaeocetes. So these guys would have been related to animals such as like Basiloteris, Eocetus, Pachysphyllus, or things like that. And these guys have appeared in popular culture a couple times. The species B. cedoes is actually found in the state fossil of Alabama and Mississippi. And during the early 19th century, these guys were so common or sufficiently large to actually originally use as furniture in the American South, which is quite interesting. And this guy was also featured, and this is what the skin is based on, Walking with Beasts, which was the kind of a sequel series to Walking with Dinosaurs, which was quite successful, and had all these based in the Cenozoic, and you had obviously that segment, and I think it was the second episode where you had the whales, and then you had these guys eating Moatheriums and eating baby Dorodons, things like that, which is actually based on some fossils, which I've mentioned last time is quite cool. And also appeared in Sea Monsters with Nigel Marvin. So yeah, really, really cool animal. Master Dude's really done a wonderful job giving us this guy. Really nice to see that long length. It'd be cool to see a slightly more accurate one, but this one's clearly more based on the Walking with Dinosaurs one. It'd be really cool, I think, like change the colors, give it a bit more lips, a little bit more seal-like anatomy potentially, maybe a little bit fatter. Yeah, it'd be cool to have one that's more like rigorously or more looks like our modern interpretations of Basilosaurus. But yeah, this one's very much based off kind of the Walking with Dinosaurs one. But yeah, really, really cool regardless, and nice to see an ancient whale in... We already had Leviathan, but we have a cool, another potentially a little bit more famous ancient whale in Jurassic World Evolution 2, so really awesome. Master Dude did a wonderful job with that. So yeah, I think this is a great place to end the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.